The Peruvian Amazon jungle has become the battleground for a war between communist insurgents and the forces of law and order. In the past few years, a group of subversive elements have inflicted dozens of casualties on the Peruvian armed forces. They are now regarded as the government's main enemy. But what are the motives behind their actions? In the hope of answering this question, and despite many warnings, I set off on a journey to establish contact with the feared insurgents. Their anti-US rhetoric and their involvement in the drugs trade that originates in Peru has prompted the United States to step into the conflict. The US State Department recently offered a $5 million reward for the movement's leader. Meanwhile, helicopters supplied by the US Drug Enforcement Agency are being deployed to hunt down the insurgents. These insurgents, who call themselves the Communist Party of Peru, or PCP, are the last remnants of the Shining Path, a communist group that, back in the 1980s, took on arms, vowing to defend the peasantry and impose a dictatorship of the proletariat. What followed was a ruthless war between the subversives and government forces. The Shining Path was characterized by its bloody tactics. Within a few years, they had annihilated thousands of Peruvians. Most of their victims were the very same peasants they were supposed to be defending. The government's response wasn't less brutal. After 20 years of conflict, the overall death toll neared 70,000.
Como leña ya a la gente veíamos muertos, cortados, todo como carneros, tajados, toda esta parte, todo el cuello partidos.
Clotilde was amongst those who suffered when the social conflict swept through the Peruvian Andes.
Hemos abierto así tienda de abarrotes, vendíamos. De cuando estamos bien comenzó el terrorismo de 80. Y de ahí así pues, estábamos en peligro, tanto matanza era. La gente también ahora ya han tomado una experiencia, ya pues, han sufrido de comida, de todo. Han dejado sus plantaciones, sus productos, sus chacras, todos sus animales. Estábamos con manos de militares, en manos de los senderos, pues. Los senderos, pues, a toda la gente de la nada mataban en la chacra.
In 1992, Abimael Guzmán, the infamous Shining Path leader, also known as Comrade Gonzalo, was finally captured by the police.
Y eso va a proseguir. Seguiremos aplicando.
Despite his original calls to continue the armed struggle, he has since been asking for amnesty. The actions of the Shining Path triggered the two-decade-long conflict, which, by year 2000, most Peruvians thought extinct. However, recent events in this region have brought back those terrible memories. The PCP has shunned any link with former leader Comrade Gonzalo and his conciliatory calls for amnesty. Instead, PCP leaders Comrades José, Raúl, and Alipio have been behind the recent lethal attacks on the armed forces.
3 soldados heridos producto del ataque perpetrado por remanentes de Sendero Luminoso. Así lo confirmó el jefe de la región militar del BRAE.
En ese hostigamiento hemos tenido 3 heridos.
A solo 2 semanas de haber hostigado una base militar en la zona del Vizcatán, remanentes senderistas atacaron con disparos la base contrasubversiva de Unión Mantaro en Ayacucho.
The group's activities are confined to an area known as the VRAE, the valley between the rivers Apurímac and Ene, a highly volatile jungle region where armed forces are fighting insurgents and drug lords.
Personas que están refugiados en el monte, porque el Estado prácticamente los busca, ¿no? ¿Para qué? Para son perseguidos por la política que ellos aplican, ¿no? Pero si bien es cierto, A nivel nacional se ha visto el BRAE, satanizado toda la vida, el narcotráfico, el terrorismo.
I continued my journey throughout the Vrae region in search of the PCP insurgents. Since the government designated the Vrae as an emergency zone, the military presence is widespread.
¿Qué tal? ¿De dónde viene? Punta de la placa, todo.
Acá arriba nomás.
¿Me permite su credencial?
Rápido, ven hijo, corriendo. Muchas gracias. Okay.
After several fruitless weeks of following false leads while traveling through the military-controlled region, I finally got a communication that seemed very promising. A reliable source suggested that a meeting with the leaders was finally possible.
I am at the rendezvous point where I'm supposed to be meeting the contact who is going to take me to the leaders of the insurgency. Now, I've been told to wait on this boat I'm sitting on right now. And at any time now, someone should be arriving here. This person is going to take me down the river until we get to a settlement from where we are going to start walking to a campsite. I wasn't allowed to bring anyone else with me, so it's only me and my camera now, from now on.
A wary boatman who didn't want to be filmed took me on a 3-hour journey heading to what I saw as a very uncertain destiny. What followed was a days-long walk across coca fields. For the peasants of the Vrae, the cultivation of the coca leaf, the raw material for cocaine, is their only means of subsistence. Towards the end of the day, I reached a wooden hut where I met a small armed detachment of the PCP.
¿A dónde están yendo acá?
Abajo, al pueblo están.
¿Y tienen que ir armados todos?
Claro, si no cualquier situación puede pasar.
I had to stay there overnight while we waited to receive instructions from the movement's high command. The day went by while the insurgents seemed at ease with my presence. However, being around the same people who are often described as indiscriminate killers made me rather uneasy. Around midday, the instructions came via walkie-talkie. The PCP leadership had authorized for me to meet them. Fearing for my safety, but encouraged by the possibility of getting an unprecedented interview, I walked for several hours more. An army helicopter flying above us made me realize that at any point I could end up stuck in a crossfire.
¿Helicóptero no te ven? ¿No nos ven?
No.
Porque es muy tupido.
Más que nada cubre la vegetación.
Claro. ¿Qué me contás? ¿Cuál es qué fierro cargas tú?
Esta es la G3HK.
Ajá. ¿Y esa es capturada de cómo?
Esta es de la policía, antidrogas.
¿Enfrentamiento?
No, machete.
¿Cómo fue esa?
Una emboscada.
¿Y ahí capturaron varias?
Sí.
¿Cuántos son?
Esta y 5 berets.
¿Hubieron bajas?
De nuestra parte, ninguna.
¿Y de ellos?
De ellos sí.
¿Cuántos?
6.
I found it hard not to think of the 6 young lives that had been lost and wonder what motives the PCP leaders would have to justify such thing. Next stop was at a shed next to a coca field that was being cultivated by a member of the PCP.
Ahorita vamos abajo, cambiando. Un cosecha coca, pero. Ahí ataque con helicóptero. Los helicópteros venían de bombas ahí, nos caía y es lo que la Richard de chaval pronto le comentó. Ahí lo han hecho herido, pero acá su brazo todo va pelado. Han soltado bomba. Entonces al llegar todo pues total pelado, pero hueso no me llega.
Cuando entran las Fuerzas Armadas, los trabajadores bien se han ido.
Hasta ahorita no vuelven todavía.
Nadie, no vuelve. Tienen miedo de monte, está. Tienen miedo de que le van a bombardear.
Suddenly, we got word that the meeting was on. I didn't know what to expect until we emerged into a clearing in the jungle, where I was greeted by a full military formation under the command of Comrade Alipio himself, one of the 3 PCP leaders and, probably, Peru's most feared man. Altogether, the PCP is said to number between 300 and 400 members. Despite the innocent look on some of their faces, this very same armed column has been responsible for the worst blows that government forces have suffered in recent years.
Yo me llamo compañero Pepe. Este fue en busca de Sanabamba. Se llama RPG.
Me llamo compañero Omar. Esto hemos confiscado en la emboscada de Matuspata. De nosotros ninguna baja. Al ejército le hemos bajado a 12.
Yo me llamo compañera Carmen. El arma que porto es un arma que se llama AKM. Fue confiscado en una emboscada a la policía en el lugar de Luricocha.
Yo me llamo compañero Alejandro. Con este ametralladora MAG se derribó el helicóptero en Sinaicocha.
Comrade Alipio was joined by the PCP's political leader, Comrade Raúl. After hours of conversations with the 2 leaders, it was agreed that Comrade Raúl would give me an interview where no topics were to be considered off limits.
La revolución peruana tiene que tener su propia ideología para hacer de nuestra revolución una revolución auténtica, propia y a su estilo. Si tenemos este trabajo de conquistar el poder y enrumbar el trabajo del socialismo mediante las armas, también respetamos ese poder que ha conquistado, por ejemplo, Hugo Chávez. Porque hablar de socialismo en este mundo tiene que ser dentro de un frente unido democrático revolucionario. Diferentes formas de posiciones, principalmente contra el superimperialismo yanqui.
The one PCP leader who was missing, presumably for security concerns, was Raúl's brother, Comrade José, the man for whose capture the United States has offered $5 million after branding him a murderer and drug trafficker.
Esa tipificación es de nuestro enemigo principal y número 1, que es Estados Unidos. Y mi hermano es revolucionario, no es delincuente. Por su captura estarían ofreciendo una cierta cantidad de dinero, porque para ellos, para los opresores de la humanidad, los comunistas no debemos existir.
Throughout the past few years, the Peruvian economy has been registering a steady growth of almost 10% a year.
La economía en el Perú ha crecido a costa del despellejamiento de nuestro pueblo. El estómago de nuestro pueblo está más hambriento que antes. Ha crecido la economía de los millonarios, de las oligarquías pro-yanquis principalmente, de esos vendepatrias, de esos que venden los recursos naturales. El pueblo en un momento va a explosionar más y nuestro partido avanzará, porque la fuente de la revolución es la pobreza.